So this next portion of the program, I actually am not entirely sure what it is we're going to be doing, so I'm really looking forward to it. So we have added to our research team for this next 3-year phase of positive energy, a public artist. People will often say about social media that it's got negative sides to it. For me, the best thing that ever happened through Twitter was meeting Cameron Cross. Cameron and I met on Twitter. I guess it goes back a couple of years ago now. He reached out to me saying, what you guys are doing with positive energy sounds extremely interesting. I'm a public artist. I do large-scale public art. I'd be very interested in connecting with you in relation to a project that he's working on. And it's been, I don't know, thick as thieves ever since then. So it's been such a pleasure to work with Cameron. And one of the reasons that we brought Cameron onto the team was the recognition that certainly a lot of the work that many of us in this room do is very driven by studies and reports and evidence, but we also recognize that increasingly issues around Canada's energy future in an age of climate change are emotional, they're visual, there are symbolic elements to them, and we wanted to bring somebody on board who really thinks from that perspective. So who better than a public artist who does large-scale public art in multiple communities, both in Canada and internationally. You can see Cameron's full bio in your package, and at this point I would like to call him up here, and he's going to run us through a relatively brief exercise, but I think it's going to get us really nicely warmed up for the next session that focuses in on energy technologies. Does that set you up all right?
That's perfect.
All right, okay, thanks.
Thank you, Monica. Good morning, everyone. I know how to read a room, and you are all dying for an art activity. It's a gift of mine. I spent my career as an educator, so I was mostly teaching teachers about best practices in art education. And a good art teacher not only teaches about visual art, but also about visual culture. So what is visual culture? It's the aspect of culture expressed in visual images, or things that impact us in a visual way. I'll just give you some examples. A house. So, ironically, I can describe this house in the terms that I use to describe a work of art. So the house has line, form, shape, color, texture, balance. But in this context, I'm wondering who lives in that house. What's their income? What's their level of education? What's their ethnicity? Is it the same as the people that live in this house? Probably not, but maybe, I don't know. But what if there was a house in this neighborhood that was demolished and this house was built in its place? How would the neighbors feel? Would they be welcoming? Would it be polarizing? Let's stick with buildings, go to museums. Has anyone been to this museum? I think probably one of the best museums in the world, the Field Museum in Chicago. Traditional neoclassical design, very traditional neighborhood, traditional context, probably not very polarizing. Now this one, the Desert Rose in Doha, Qatar. Just opened 3 months ago, $500 million, and maybe it seems like it would be polarizing, but the French architect, Jean Nouvel, designed it after the Desert Rose, which is found in the Qatari desert. So it's a calcium buildup, and when you pick it up and put it in your hand, locals think it looks like a rose. So not polarizing at all. Who's been to this museum? That's in my neck of the woods, the Canadian Museum for Human Rights. Very polarizing. Yeah, in all sorts of ways, in terms of its contents and design. So it's a new face in an old neighborhood. The neighborhood is the Forks, and it's where the Red and the Assiniboine rivers meet. And it was a center of industry about 100 years ago, railway, and what else? Oh, a place where indigenous people met for 12,000 years. So lots of controversy, and the design itself is controversial, but will it be controversial in 50 years? The glass pyramid outside the Louvre. Controversial when it went up, 30 years ago? A lot of people thought it was Francois Mitterrand's ego trip. He hired the most famous architect of the day, I.M. Pei. Chinese American, just died this year, actually, about 106 years old, I think. But a glass pyramid outside the most famous Renaissance palace or fortress in the world. So very controversial at the time, but now 30 years later, probably one of the most famous places to take a selfie in Paris. So it says a little bit about the context and the history and the time. This is a great story. I could talk about this for hours, and I have in my past. But the Eiffel Tower in Paris. If Nick Nanos was alive in 1887 and he was polling Parisians, over half would have said, we don't want this thing. We hate this thing. Actually, it tore Paris apart. It tore families apart, tore neighborhoods apart. And not only the public, but these two gentlemen, kings of the literary community, went on campaigns around Europe to denounce this structure. And when it was built, Guy de Maupassant, actually, it was rumored that he wrote a letter to the newspapers every day for 2 years denouncing the project. And he wrote the letter inside the Eiffel Tower. So finally someone came up to him and said, if you hate this structure so much, why are you in it every day? And he said, because it's the only place in Paris I can go where I don't have to look at it. That's hardcore. Bridges, I'm not going to talk about bridges, but normally they're not polarizing or controversial. Why? Because we need them, right? We need to get over the moat, we need to get over the river, we need to get over the gorge. So people usually forget about, billboards. These have a special place in my heart. I would suggest that if you live in Toronto or Ottawa, Montreal, and if somebody magically put up 50 or 100 more billboards overnight, you wouldn't even notice. Right? They're ubiquitous to our landscape. They're everywhere. Not to say they're not interesting. These are some of my favorite. Water rationing in Denver. But of course, not all are successful. And this is not a slight against Maxime Bernier or the People's Party, but this was like a visual impact times 2. Huge visual impact when they went up, and huge visual impact when they were forced to be taken down. So that's visual impact. So, to set the context for energy objects, hydro poles, wooden poles. Does anyone know when the first wooden pole went up in Canada? No, neither do I. So somebody should Google it. But, they can be quite beautiful, idyllic, and they're in lots of photos. But I would suggest that if you drove 1,000 kilometers down the Trans-Canada Highway, how many would you see? 50, 100, 500, 1,000? Probably you wouldn't see any, because again, they're so ubiquitous, right? They're just part of the landscape. They're everywhere, but they're kind of nowhere, right? But big and imposing, can be. And, I've been up on a lot of northern reserves, and I guess is when you see these string of hydro poles or hydro structures in northern reserves, is it a sign of economic impact, or is it a symbol that this reserve or this community has been relocated? So it's another part of our visual. So what is the visual impact of these hydro towers? Solar panels. We're seeing them increasingly everywhere. Part of our visual landscape. India and China, so many solar panel lakes, they call them now, so they're taking over lakes. How do the fishermen feel about this? How do the fish feel about this? This is in Japan. So again, what's the visual impact of, it's green technology, but what's the visual impact? How is it impacting people? Now there's a comment, Nick made a comment earlier about people that like the looks of these. That would be, That would be me. I'm from Winnipeg, so when I drive to the southern U.S. border, sometimes I just stop the car and I've walked up to them. Have you ever walked up to one of these monsters? Yeah, they're huge. But I think they're beautiful. It reminds me like, I don't know, like you're in War of the Worlds, or they're just so different and so unique. But Stephen said this is a derogatory term now, sorry, but I just learned about this term through Monica, I guess a year and a half ago. But when I talk to some of my farmer friends in southern Manitoba in the Altona area, they hate them, right? Hate them with a passion. There are some people that think they're making them sick. And when I asked him, I said, well, how can it be that I like them so much and you don't? And he said, well, I see them every day, like every day, and they're so imposing. So they're creeping up all over the place, even in the ocean. So what's the visual impact? Of course, there are other, I'm not going to talk about all the images in energy, but oil rigs, nuclear power plants, of course. But yeah, there's lots of images, but we're going to, we have 5 minutes left, so that's perfect timing. On your table, there is an envelope, and it says positive energy, visual culture. And you have 4 cards in the envelope, symbol of the wind turbine, hydro tower, solar panel, and a blank card. So this is what we would like you to do. We'd like you to take those cards out. We were supposed to have police call holders, but they didn't come in. But just have a table discussion, if you can, and just rank them in order from most polarizing to least polarizing, right? In 5 minutes, we'll just ask one person from each table, not from each table, but whoever wants to. They all seem, less polarizing, but try to rank them if you can, from most polarizing to least polarizing. Not as easy as it sounds. Okay, thank you, everyone. Could we please get at least one person from a table to share what their table talked about? Maybe hold up your card. Thank you. Broke the ice. Hold the card up.
Which one do you want? Most polarizing? Okay. Is this
Here we go, everyone. Okay, go ahead.
Basically, we actually had a long discussion about what would be the most polarizing, largely based on size and how new something was to a given area. We also were curious if the blank card would actually be symbolic of the unknown, as to, are we going to introduce a new energy project but not tell anybody about it, because that would probably be the most polarizing. However, based on sort of news articles and that sort of thing, we did determine that this one ultimately would be the most polarizing, followed by transmission lines, and then last would be solar. But again, it would depend on the size of the installation.
Great, thank you. Anyone else?
Thanks. We were much in the same boat. We were mystified by the blank card. But we actually had hydro towers as our most polarized. But the conversation really was whether this was something for us to create as our own energy source, or if it was going to be sort of a complete blank slate. And so we kind of left that one out, but that's definitely intrigued us.
The easy answer is I forgot to tell you the instructions on that last blank card, but I like your answers much better, much better. So one more. Oh, here we go.
Well, we found it very polarizing around the table. And we didn't really come up with an answer, but we did decide that it depended a lot upon who you were. If any of these three things was going to be put on your land against your wishes, then they're probably all equally polarizing. If you're just driving down a highway, as you pointed out earlier, they're all reasonably familiar, and probably none of them are very polarizing. But then there was also a suggestion that the wind and the solar probably generate some revenues for you. So if you had those on your land and it was your choice, then it wouldn't be as polarizing as a transmission line crossing your land. So I'm sorry we don't have an answer for you other than those.
That's an answer, yeah.
thoughts.
That's a great answer. Thank you. How's that, Monica? Okay. Thank you, everyone. That was the best 15 minutes of my life.
Cameron, that was terrific. I think I can speak on behalf of everybody here who looks very, very energized. So we're moving directly into the next panel.